Hi, this is Street Life, and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review and discussion of In the Land of Saints and Sinners. In the Land of Saints and Sinners is a movie about an assassin, Finbar Murphy, who decides to retire and live a more quiet life in a small Irish town. When the movie opens, he's on what he doesn't yet realize is his last assignment as a hitman. He's taken a contract to kill a man who had committed some wrongs in the past, but unexpectedly, so he gives his targets a minute or so to do what they want with it, right? As some people might be tempted to do, they might beg for their lives, try to make amends, plead, cry, whatever. But this man accepts that he's done wrong in the past and instead uses this time to speak to Finbar about the changes that he's made since he committed those wrongs. It's now been several years, and, someone's out for revenge against him, hence why Finbar has been hired, but he uses the time Finbar gives him to kind of make peace with what's about to happen. He's not happy about it, but he speaks to Finbar about the wrongs that he did in his past, and reaching a point in his life where he realized that he couldn't go on like that anymore, that he wanted to make some changes to do some good. And it's actually quite telling because when we first see him and Finbar come into contact with each other. It's at a local pub where he's become a member of the community. He's well regarded. He's invited to sing and whatnot. Looking at him, you would think he's just some regular older guy who's been around for a while. But we come to find out that he actually has done some wrong in his past. He's done some wrong in his life. And so he uses these last minutes of his life to explain to Finbar that the person he is now, this man living this seemingly normal life, singing in a pub and whatnot, that's the man that he truly is. The change that he underwent, it was because he genuinely decided to make a change in his life to turn things around, and he encourages Finbar to do the same. He doesn't stand in judgment of him for what he's going to do to him, for being there to kill him, but rather just tries to share some of his own life experience and knowledge with Finbar that he's been here before. Maybe not in exactly the same place, but he's been in this position of having done wrong in the past, coming to see the error of his ways and deciding to change. And so he speaks to Finbar in these last few minutes about really encouraging him to do the same, why he might want to follow suit. And never mind that he's here facing death, which is the consequence for the wrong he's done in the past. He accepts that. But rather that Finbar should take whatever time he has left in his own life to turn things around, to be useful in the world, to do something positive with the time that he has left. And it's sometimes, with messages like this, someone will say something to you, or you're watching TV, you overhear something, however it comes about, or just in conversation. But you hear something, and it's at other points in your life, you might have just brushed it off. But you hear that word, you hear that message at a particular time in your life where you're open to receiving it. And that's the case here with Finbar, where it's unclear exactly how old he is, but we can tell from looking at him he's a good, 50-something, maybe 60-something years old. This is an older man who's lived, not some young buck or whatever running around out here, right? This conversation leads to him realizing that this isn't the life that he wants to live anymore. So he goes to collect his payment from his contact, Robert, from whom he gets these contracts. He accepts the money for the job, but tells Robert that this is going to be his last job, that he wants to do something different with his life. And so with that, he settles into this small town where he lives. Now, obviously, you wouldn't go around telling people that you're a hitman, so he keeps that part of his life private, but the life that he leads in this town, it's, I guess, effectively like a cover story, but that's really who he is, right? He has this job off doing what he does, but he's a part of the town. Of all people, he's good friends with Vincent, a member of law enforcement. They go out shooting and whatnot. They spend time together. There's another young assassin, Kevin, who, to be quite honest, was pretty annoying, right? And Finbar makes an honest attempt to live a better life, to move forward and become an even greater part of the community. Putting aside that part of his life, there's a young girl in town, Moira, who seems to be about maybe 7 or 8 years old, lives with her mom. It's a small town. It's one of those kinds of towns where everyone knows everyone. And so he sees her while he's out and about one day. I think she was fishing or something like that, or whatever it was she was doing. She dropped what she had in her hands and is immediately upset about it, right? And It's understandable that a kid might be worried about getting into trouble in a situation like that. He tries to reassure her, but in doing so, he takes his hand and puts it on her shoulder, and her shirt kind of moves aside, and he notices like a pretty gnarly looking bruise. When she realizes, it makes her even more scared, where she runs off. Finbar seeks out her mom, hoping to explain and kind of smooth things over to avoid her getting into trouble. The mom doesn't seem particularly upset, so it kind of begs the question, where's this fear coming from? Who is it that Moira is afraid of? And so he smooths things over with her mom, and when he goes to let her know that everything's okay, he meets Curtis, who's staying with Moira and her mother, and is obviously the source of Moira's fear. It's like some kind of in-law situation where Curtis, his sister Doreen, and some associates are now staying with Moira and her mom, and it's like there's some funny business going on. Curtis is young, he's brash, arrogant, foolish. It seems like he's the one being abusive towards Moira, not sexual or anything like that, but like physically abusive. You can tell he's a very aggressive person, quick-tempered, and not a very nice guy, just from like the brief interaction that Finbar has with him. It's like from that brief interaction, I just didn't like him. He seemed like trouble. When we first meet Curtis during his interaction with Finbar and Moira, the camera goes on to follow him as he meets up with his sister Doreen and these two other associates. This is Ireland, and it seems to be like during the time when there might have been like some terrorist activity. So him, Doreen, and their associates, one of the associates is actually putting together what seems to be a bomb. They have guns and whatnot. Nothing good is going on here. It becomes very clear that Curtis, is not such a great person. These friends that he has, probably not as well, and they have other people probably behind them as well. Finbar is actually warned about this. It's understandable that you would want to protect this kid, but at the same time, understand that Curtis is trouble himself, but the people that he's with, they're a danger as well. And so it's a matter of, if you do something to him, it might not just stop there, because you'll then have to worry about these associates that are with him here, as well as possibly other people coming after you. But Finbar decides that he just can't leave well enough alone, and takes it upon himself to seek out Curtis and handle the situation. So in a sense, he's heeding Bart's advice, the guy that he killed, in that he's left this life behind as an assassin, and he's trying to do good. So he's operating in the spirit of Bart's warning, but it's kind of this thing of doing bad in efforts to do good. Because realistically, he could have gone to Vincent, who's a Garda officer, but he would likely not be much of a match for these really terrorists they seem to be. So Finbar decides to take it upon himself to right the situation. He decides to do something about this guy, Curtis, and Kevin, who's also a young hothead, gets involved, and it just creates havoc. So Dorian and her associates are now trying to find out what happened to Curtis, and as a result, Finbar then tries to defend himself and the townspeople from them. In a sense, the movie kind of reminded me of Taken a bit. This thing of Liam Neeson portraying a character who's seeking vengeance or trying to protect a loved one in this case. These are people, not just Moira, but the rest of the community. These are people that he cares for who would arguably be unable to protect themselves from these dangerous people. So it's kind of similar in that sense. But where it differs is that the story is taking place in this small town in Ireland. So you have some really nice scenery. It's along the coast and whatnot. There's some scenes where it's like you see the waves are crashing along the rocks. Robert and his sweet wife live in this nice house out by the water. Beautiful location. And so that's part of the story. Now, the story could have taken place in a city, but I think by setting it in a small town, it gives a different vibe and a different feeling. Not to mention that the members of the community, this being a small community, this enables them to know each other, to have relationships, and to care about each other more deeply. And so it helps to reinforce this story of, well, I would think that you wouldn't need much of a reason, I would hope, that you wouldn't need much of a reason for an adult to care about a kid who seems to be being abused. But beyond that, there's this thing throughout the story of these individuals, Dorian, Curtis, and their crew, being marked as outsiders, where they attract attention because no one's ever really seen them around. No one knows them. It's a small community where pretty much everybody knows everybody, and so they stand out. And as a result of that, it's kind of like, I wouldn't say it's a slow burn, but it's dark and suspenseful. I like these kinds of films where there's like a little bit of commentary about society, but then there's also action. Because eventually, there's going to be a confrontation between Finbar and this crew, but it unfolds nicely. There's like little incidents along the way. They come around looking for Curtis. They go to Finbar's house where he spots them, and it becomes this thing of who's going to get to who first. Being a small, close-knit community, the residents stick together, and Dorian and crew pretty much are like tearing the town apart in efforts to find out what happened to Curtis. Finbar is like a typical Liam Neeson type character, and that's not a bad thing here. But I found Dorian to be quite compelling, and in some ways she actually kind of stole the movie from me. Not that you're necessarily rooting for her, as Curtis is annoying, but I do understand her motivation. And it's like one of these things that I like with movies where the protagonist is interesting, but at the same time, the villain is interesting in their own right, where there's something compelling that catches your attention. They're not like just a cardboard cookie cutter type character. There's some kind of nuance to them, something that makes them interesting in their own right, where they add something to the movie beyond being just some bumbling villain for the hero to beat up on. And so I don't want to give like too much of the movie away. It's a movie that I would recommend checking out if you're into these kinds of films. It's like, never mind that it takes place in the countryside and it's bright and green and beautiful and whatnot. Because of the film's nature, it still feels dark and brooding. And I like these kinds of films that have like that feeling to them. But I actually enjoyed the movie. I went to see it and didn't come out of the theater regretting it. And that was actually a positive for me, as some of the recent films, most of the films that I've been to see recently, I have not enjoyed. So it was a welcome departure to go and sit through. I think this was like an hour and 45 minutes or so. And I felt that from start to end, it was a pretty interesting and engrossing movie. Is it completely fresh and original, avant-garde, that's going to change cinema? No. But I think it's like a cool way to spend an afternoon at the movies. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I recommend it. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.